I can't remember which U.S. congressman it was, but he tweeted a link to the most surprising and interesting essay I've read all year. It was basically, why would anyone want an AR-15? The way it was phrased was, what the hell do you need an AR-15 for anyways? It's a question put to firearms rights enthusiasts or preppers, people who say they're preparing for some event. And it seems like a normal liberal question to say, come on, what do you really need that for? But as I started to read this essay, I felt like the scales were falling from my eyes, because it was written not by someone who I think is particularly known for his politics or his journalism or even his firearms rights, but rather for statistics, and in particular, stormwater hydrology and the mathematics of unlikely events. Let me give you 1 second of what I mean before I introduce our guest today. How likely is it that on any given year, if you're living near a floodplain, that you will be the victim of a 100-year flood? Well, obviously that means 1 in 100 years. But what if you live there for 5 years, for 10 years, for 30 years over the course of the life of your mortgage? All of a sudden, the likelihood that your house might be destroyed by a once-a-century flood becomes very large, to the point where you need insurance to get a mortgage, flood insurance. And imagine using that same sort of thinking, not about a natural flood, but a political storm, like a revolution. And even America, the most stable, strong democracy in the world, well, it had a revolution in 1776, and it had a near revolution in the Civil War. Why, that's 2 in just a couple hundred years. Joining us now to talk more about where this argument goes, this thought experiment, is B.J. Campbell, the author of this fascinating piece that I suddenly found myself reading. You can read his work itself on Freakoutery.com, and we'll have his contact information on the screen. Well, B.J., thank you so much for taking the time to join us via Skype. I just started reading. You say you're not a professional writer, but I couldn't stop once I started. Tell us a little bit about this article. I know you wrote it a while back, but it only came to my attention after a congressman tweeted it.
Yeah, it was Thomas Massey tweeted it, actually, and I got a neat little traffic spike out of it. But the article really went big, I think, probably right after it was written. It was featured on the front page of Medium, and they blasted it out on Twitter and stuff like that, I think spring of last year of 2018.
Well,
and
forgive me for catching up. So. I'm a little bit behind, but you know what? It's
sure.
Timeless. It's timeless. Tell me how you started thinking about these cataclysmic or catastrophic events. Is that what you do for a living?
I'm a stormwater hydrologist, and so what stormwater hydrologists do, I'm a civil engineer, and what we use stormwater hydrology for is to try and determine, how big to size a pipe, how wide a bridge has to be, how to make sure our buildings are outside of floodplains, and all that sort of thing as it relates to civil engineering infrastructure. And so this kind of thinking is, it's baked into our field, and the terminology is baked into our field. And what I did in the article was I went through what we call a historical frequency analysis, which is a really straightforward mathematical way to try and predict, the likelihood over time of very unlikely events. And, which is a simpler version of what risk analysis professionals do. And we can talk about that a little bit later, because, when they do the kind of thing, they end up with more alarming answers than what I get. But I can step you through the mathematical analysis at the beginning if you like. It's really pretty simple. It's at most high school algebra. That's all you really need to follow it.
Yeah, well, I'm not a math expert, but the way you laid it out, even I could follow it. Why don't you take us through it a little bit? If I may, you started saying, well, why would these tech billionaires be buying these bunkers, these survivalist bunkers? Does it make any sense? And you showed mathematically, yes, it did. And you I thought that was an interesting place to start. Why would a billionaire spend $50 million on some zombie apocalypse place for real? Not just joke about it, but I actually do. Why don't you start to take us through it, and I'll do my best not to interrupt. I'm just so excited by the subject, and it's such a great piece. Why don't you take us through your reasoning?
You have to determine a flood, right, that you're concerned about. And in the United States, for the National Flood Insurance Program, we're concerned with the 100-year flood. And there's a push in the field now to stop calling it that because it makes people think that it's only ever going to happen every 100 years. So if you had one last year, you're not going to have one this year, which is the gambler's fallacy, right? So they start talking about it now as the flood that's likely to happen, at a 1%, recurrence interval. So the chance of this is 1% per year. It's 0.01. But what you do to try and figure out, say, the chance of a flood over a 30-year mortgage, you don't just add that up 30 times because it wouldn't be honest. What you have to do is you have to back figure it. What you do is you say, all right, well, there's a 99% chance of no flood. And what you're looking for is that 99% chance of no flood to happen 30 times in a row, right? Mm-hmm. So the way you would calculate that is to say 0.99 times 0.99 times 0.99, et cetera, 30 times. So it's 0.99 to the 30th power, right? Mm-hmm. And then that would give you a chance of maybe 74% of no flood, which means you have a 26% chance of at least one flood, right? Mm-hmm. Makes sense? Over the course of your 30-year mortgage. So that's a big deal, and nobody sells you your house, right? So, or they require you to pay cash, or you have to get insurance or such. Well, we can do the same thing with violent revolutions. So let me pull up the figures here just to be clear. So if we say the average establishment of colonies on the United States is 1678, and I wrote the article last year, so it's 340 years since that, right? And we've had two, as you mentioned earlier, we've had two qualifying events of attempts at nationwide violent revolution. The Revolutionary War and the Civil War. That's two data points inside, 340 years, which is a 0.00588%, or not percent, that's the chance, like a little over 0.5% chance per year of this happening. And then if you say, well, we're not worried about whether there's going to be a civil war during our mortgage, we're worried about it happening in our lifetime, we all live to be about 78 years old, and you do the same kind of math. And the result that you get is a 37% chance that there's a violent revolution across any of our given lifespans. That's large. That's bigger than, it's bigger than the chance that, your home gets flooded out. So when we talk about nobody wants to buy a house in a floodplain, but nobody's thinking about the fact that the chance of violent revolution during your lifetime is larger than that.
That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show, which is a show I do every day. I do a monologue, interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at premium.rebelnews.com.